2007 Dodge Sprinter 3500 3.0 diesel. I'm going to be removing the transmission and the torque converter. I've not been able to find a lot of information on these on the internet. I can find the earlier models of Sprinter, but not these. So I thought while I go through this, and I'll record a video, that way you know you'll be seeing it as I run across it. I probably won't be showing pulling the bolts out themselves. You know, I'll just do it in parts and give you hints as to what I ran into as we go. One of the first things I did was check the transmission control module. I knew it was under the seat, but I didn't know exactly where. But it's right here in front. There's two screws right here, one down on the bottom, and the electrical connections up here on the top. There's a tab on the back side that releases the two connections, and then you need to check and make sure that there's no oil there, because where the electrical connections plug on to the transmission, a lot of times it'll leak transmission fluid through there, and it'll actually force transmission fluid through the electrical wires inside of the wires themselves, the coating, and the transmission fluid will get down into the module and ruin it. But they say that you can take it apart and clean it with some type of cleaner, and it'll work again after that. But I checked mine was fine, but I ended up, because I didn't know where it's at, I took my seat off. These are 10mm, or E10 rather, Torx bolts. And to check your codes, underneath here is where your LB2 code reader is, right underneath there, along with one of the fuse boxes. They say that once you change the transmission, you have to clear the codes, which I did mine first. Well, I read my codes and then I cleared them, and then well, I read my codes, took pictures of it, and then I cleared them out. The next thing I went to was the torque converter bolts, because I knew that those is going to be difficult. And I'll show you what I ran into there, because this is definitely different than the earlier model Sprinters. One thing you'll have to do is get a 27 millimeter bolt in on the harmonic balancer, and you have to go in through here and feed it up in there, and then at a 90-degree angle, and then turn it to fit inside. What I had to do was stick the socket in there and then work on getting the correct extension that'll get me out to here, because there's no room to play with. And then of course I couldn't get the ratchet on it with it in there, so then I had to pull it back out, assemble the ratchet and socket and everything all together, and then fit it up into there sideways, and then work it in. The next thing is torque converter bolts. Those are a 55 Torx bolt. I'm sorry, I keep saying millimeter, but 55 Torx bolt. And most kits only go up to T50, and so be sure to get a T55, because if you put a T50 in there, even though it feels like that it would hold it, there's a little bit of play, but most more likely you're going to strip something out and then try to get into this spot, which I'm going to show you. Would make a miserable day indeed if you mess them bolts up, because they are torqued in there pretty good. I don't know if you can see up in there, but up there is where the Torx bolt are at, and plus the drain plug for the torque converter. I'm sorry, but there's a little rubber boot that covers that, and I took needle nose pliers and pulled that boot off to gain access. I'm sure trying to get that boot back in is going to be much more difficult than it was for me to get it out. Now, one thing that they did, they put a hole in there. I don't know if you can see it or not, to where you can feed the tool up into it to get up into the hole, and it works really, really well. This is a whole lot easier than the earlier models. Now those bolts are really torqued in there. They're pretty tight. So that's why I want to warn you not to use a 50, because you'll probably strip it out before you get them out. Right here is your drain plug for the transmission pan, which will be draining the fluid. Right there's the drive shaft connections. Have to take them off on this end. You'll have to drop the carrier bearing here, and then you can drop disconnect it here, and then you should just be able to pull this one section out, and that'll give you clearance to drop your transmission. One thing to pay attention to whenever you're taking these bolts out is it'll feel like that you're on there, you know, like you've got a really good bite, but actually this part here will be holding you off at a little bit of an angle, and you end up rounding the bolt off. I ran into that. Make sure that you get you an extension to kind of get away from that, and that you've got it on flush. The way I done this, I went ahead and got the drive shaft out, and I jacked up. I put a jack underneath the center of the crossover mount, and took the two bolts out of the tail shaft mount and jacked that up, and that gave me some clearance. And so I put a jack stand up underneath it to hold it up temporarily. Now I'm going to put my jack over there, then I'll put my jack stand underneath here, and the bolts coming out from the crossover mount came out pretty easy. They're 16s on both sides, and the bolts for this is a 16. One thing that I didn't notice earlier is there's a brace coming from the exhaust over to the tail shaft mount. That booger is going to be in the way. It'd be better if I can get it loose here, because that way they can come, because this here is going to hold me up as I try to pull the transmission out if I take it loose here at the tail shaft mount. Now, normally bolts don't come out well from at exhaust points, so I'll let you know how that goes. Surprisingly, those bolts come right off. Normally exhaust bolts are really rusty and snap before they'll give, but didn't have any problems there at all. And the other two bolts are back here, and then I took that bracket off. Now today I'm going to try to get these the transmission bolts out. One of the first things I gotta do, which I don't know about that starter, I'll have to look and see how that's mounted. But I think those two bolts there might hold the starter on, or at least it did in other vans. So I have to see about that. I noticed that the starter wires themselves was really rusted and corroded up. And the bad thing about the starter wires is the plastic that they're mounted on after getting hot and cold gets very fragile. And so whenever you start trying to break loose the nuts to get the wires off, then you can actually bust the plastic. Usually they'll put a nut on the bottom or some way of holding it that you can put a wrench on the first tap that you can secure it and then break it loose with break the second tap loose. At least on the big one they normally do. I haven't really looked at this one to see yet. But I'm hoping that that starter might mount from the other side and not have to take it off. This bracket here, I was trying to get to my inspection plate so I could see what type of transmission it was. And so I took that loose. That top bolt snapped on me. So I'm going to have to work on that whenever I get it out. And I know on other vans they talk about these bolts breaking off in the back of the motor. And I really hope that that doesn't happen today. Here's the electrical connector, and it just rotates down and back and then pulls out, which I'll be doing that. I gotta find out where the transmissions lines are at and how to get them loose. I'll explain them on my next one once I figure it out. The dipstick tube, I'll have to figure out how to get it out as well. I was thinking it was on this side, but yeah, there it is. Not sure if you can see it up in there. But I think there's a bolt that secures that, and if I'm not mistaken, it'll just pull up and out. If it doesn't, I'll tell you different in the next video. But I think it's secured up here in the front too, with along with those bolts. Okay, and that's my plan to try to it should be about ready to drop after I get all that disconnected. I'll update you on the next one. Okay, that I've got the bracket out of the way where this hooks up. That just pries off on the end, and this cable right here has got squeeze points, and then that'll lift up, and then you'll be able to just move this cable out of your way as best as possible. And I do have the electrical connector unplugged. I just turned it down and it pulled right out, no problem at all. And right now I'm going to go after the dipstick tube, and it's been zip tied. Well, this electrical cable has been zip tied to the tube, so we'll have to cut that out. Okay, the bolt that I took out for the dipstick tube, it was a 10. The bolts at the front of the transmission, they're 14, which I've not got all them off yet. Those bolts are very, very long, and some of them stick out the front. There's two on this side where the starter would be. I guess where the starter would be. There's like a plate on the other side, but you might want to spray those down with lubricant. And the starter is the same way. And let's see if I can see that. I'm hung up. I do regret where I placed my support for the back of the transmission, because that dude is right in the way, causing me a lot of issues. Right up here is the transmission line. I'm not sure what size it is. I put a 3/4 on it and it just come right loose. I'm not sure what 3/4 in metric is right at the moment. I apologize about that. But that's the one on this side. And then to get to the other one is right here. I can't see the camera right now, but I'm assuming that it's showing on it. But I'm guessing it's going to be the same size as the other, and that'll be the thing that I do next. Okay, this might be a little bit difficult to film, but I worked my little piece of wood in there, like how I moved my transmission video that the Sprinter guy put on. And the way that I worked it in, I come up by this hose here and then come across and then fished it in. I had to jack up the back of the transmission enough to get enough gap to work it in. I don't know if I can see it from this side or here or not. It's laying right across the front axle, and I'm pretty sure that it'll be strong enough to support the motor once the transmission comes out. But I want to get rid of this right here, get it out of my way. But I'm going to leave that back center stand on there unless it gets even more aggravating than what it is. I had it up here close and I just kept banging against it trying to get to the bolts, and so it had to go. Okay, this transmission line also has a bracket on that bottom bolt there that'll have to come out before that line will get out of the way. Actually, that bracket goes to both of them. Okay, that one bolt down here releases the lines too. Okay, everything went as planned. Those two bolts there are 16s. On the other side, the bolts like them go into the starter, and this side here's got taps, and the starter's got taps in on it when it comes out. I was able to just kind of set the starter to one side. It's kind of hanging on the wires a little bit. I don't like that, but I'll have to see what happens when the transmission actually starts coming. I've got one bolt up there to take out that's holding it in right now. It turns out I didn't actually need any support in the back at all, because that little board I put in there was plenty sufficient to hold the transmission up. I just didn't know it. The dipstick tube, one thing I didn't think about was mine does have a dipstick in it, and so whenever I tried to pull it up, the dipstick was hanging inside the transmission. It gave me a little bit of difficulty getting it out, but it just pulls straight up once you take that tap out. And I got both the transmission lines out, and whenever I go to clean them, I'll be blowing the cleaner into this tube, which pushes it backwards, because they want the flow going backwards whenever you clean it out, the oil cooler. Well, I can't think of anything else right at the moment. It's ready to put the jack underneath it and take that bolt out and see what I can do. I'm going to need a bit more clearance for the dipstick tube. Let me see if I can. But there's a couple more bolts that hold it in, and we'll try to see if I can find it. Here's the camera. I think that might be it there. And then there's one up. If I can get off the alternator. It's hard to find things with the camera. I can see them. But up here in front, there's another bolt right there we go. To loosen up to get the dipstick tube off. I think if I just get the one down at the bottom, that'll allow it to free away from the transmission enough. And I'm going to try that and leave this one up here on.